Yeah, hello everybody. Just like to thank Raz and everybody and the organisers for allowing me to speak today. So it's been a pleasure. Quick introduction about myself. So I'm Ryan Murphy. I've 20 years plus experience now in Microsoft technologies, working with global retail, private banking, UK law firms, global law firms, UK and EU education, UK EU public sector, e-hospitals, future energy cities based out of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, global telecoms, of course, much more. So I'm currently working for Microsoft as a compliance SME, assisting global organizations to meet regulations within Microsoft 365 compliance solutions, and that can be within internal regulations or external regulations, or even countries that have a data sovereignty law applied to them. I have my own blog, which is msftcompliance.com, and if you want to keep in touch, you can follow me on LinkedIn also. Today's agenda will be Microsoft 365 compliance. So just be an introduction into what the Compliance Center does and the main aspects I usually spend most of my time in for my customers. And that will be around Microsoft Compliance Manager, Microsoft Information Protection, data loss prevention and endpoint data loss prevention, Microsoft Information Governance and records management, Microsoft Insider Risk Management, and communications compliance. So, okay then. So within Microsoft 365 Compliance Center itself, to get here, you just type in compliance.microsoft.com. This will take you through to the homepage of what you can see here. On the homepage itself, it just gives you a brief overview of your environment. So you have your compliance manager here and your compliance score. You have the solutions catalog, which I'll show you in just a moment. And then we have cloud app compliance, users with the most shared files. You also have your retention label usage. So if you're using retention to retain any data, this is what you'll see in the most locations where they've been applied. High risk apps, you see those here. Third-party DLP policy matches, Discover Shadow IT, communications compliance. We'll touch on this briefly later on. Shared files, active alerts within your DLP. Okay, so under solutions here, you have catalog. And then within here, you have the four main areas of what the solutions are. So you have data loss prevention. So this gives you the ability to detect sensitive content. So if you have a document that's classified as sensitive information within it, or a sensitivity label that's been applied to it, and you want to prevent that from being shared outside your organization, or you want to put monitoring around it, then this is where you would come to basically build those DLP policies out. Information governance, as it states, it manages your content life cycle. So if you have a regulation to keep data for a certain amount of time, GDPR is usually a good one to reference here. You can actually use the information governance to apply those retention labels, policies to that particular document or document sets or data sets, or even data that you don't have in Microsoft 365. This also gives you the ability to provide reports on the retentions that you have. You also have information protection. So this covers, classifies and protects sensitive and business critical data. So here's where you would come with your classification taxonomy, or labeling taxonomy as Microsoft likes to call it. You'd map those documentations or those requirements into the configurations within MIPS, or information protection. That then would give you the ability to label documents as highly sensitive, secret, classified, whatever the case. Then we have records management. So records management's more of an addition to information governance, but it's more of an extended capabilities when it comes to the solution itself. So usually if you have to abide by regulations, whether they be internal or external, here's where you would come to apply those. And records management gives you the ability to classify documents as immutable. You also have the opportunity within here to go through dispositions, and Microsoft now supports multiple dispositions. So if you have a plethora of authorizers within your environment that have to be selected to before data is deleted rather, then this is where you would come to set those up. So Compliance Manager. So within Compliance Manager then, Compliance Manager gives you your compliance score here. Now, this score here is really dependent on what your organization requirements are. I have some customers that have this up into the high 80s. I have some customers that have this just around the 50% marker. It purely depends on what your organization requirements are. If you're a highly regulated environment like a bank or perhaps a law firm or something of that sort of industry, then you would usually see this up into past the 70s into the 80s more or less, and then depending on again what you need from a business perspective, this can change significantly. A lot of people get into analysis paralysis with this particular number, having to get it as high as possible without actually realizing the actual detrimental effect of maybe turning certain solutions on, which you don't particularly need to have on. So just be cautious of this. Don't get too overwhelmed with getting this number up. Just do what's right for your organization or do what's right for the external regulators. So within here, you have obviously your score breakdown. This will go through any of the particular areas inside of the Compliance Center, within security as well, in some aspects of what you've got, what your improvement actions may be, what regulations you're applied to. You can choose them out up here through your assessments or assessment templates. Your assessments within here will be, you can select stuff like GDPR or PPDR or something like that, depending on where your area is or what your geographical location is. As you can see here, we've got GDPR from Microsoft 365. Then you also have the data protection baseline. This one here comes in standard, so it really doesn't depend on what licensing you have. You'll have access to this one. Others like this come with assessments or assessment templates. Depending on your license currently, would depend on what you can actually pick out. But if you do have a regulation that you have to abide by, you can come in here and add assessment and go through this and select assessment template. As you can see from in here, there's a number of, well, there's quite a lot in here actually. There's 667 items that you can choose from, and I think it covers pretty much every geographical area you can think of. You can select the relevant ones out here that you need, you know, the Canadian one there that I've alluded to before. Choose those, they will come in here. They will give you a list of actions that you need to go through to abide by that regulation. Here's the actions, so your improvement actions come down here, and as you can see, you get a numeric value that you can apply to your overall score by actioning these. You've got your view all over improvements here. If any of them are pending an update, if the regulator has changed anything in the background or there's been a configuration update to the actual template itself or the technical assessment within itself, then you'll see this here with a pending update. You'll have to go through this and accept this before it's published. Okay, let's just select one so we can see what's inside of them. So when you select one, then what this gives you is the information that is behind it and why it is the way it is, why the regulator has it the way it is, and how this impacts you from a 365 perspective. You have a number of options here. So you may be in an environment where you've already gone through most of these, or you may be in an environment where you're very new, you're a brand new tenant, and you want a little bit more information on your implementation status, what the overview may be. You also have the ability to go through a testing phase here as well. And then you have your standards and regulations, so what they map back to. They're all detailed here. And then you've got a documents phase. So if you go through a testing phase and you have a document that you want to use as a testing spreadsheet, or any other documentation to tell, you know, the business or the regulator, okay, you know, we've done what you've asked us to do. We now have the score up to a decent amount, or whatever the case may be, or we have these particular configurations installed. You can upload the documentation here for everybody to view. That's the Compliance Center in brief then. So let's take a look at data loss prevention. So as I mentioned before, data loss prevention will allow you to put policies in place for transactional data. So if you have a number of documents, or you have a number of emails that you want to protect, or you want to monitor or prevent from being shared externally, This is where you would come to build those out. More often than not, if you have a classification or a labels taxonomy, some of those labels would include internal references to them, so confidential, internal, and so on and so forth. So here's where you would come to basically build that out, and I'll just show you briefly what that would look like. So here I have a prevent internally labeled items from external sharing. We'll take a quick look at this one so you can have a look at what the actual structure of a DLP policy looks like. Let's wait for it to load. Okay, so as you can see, you get most of the main locations within Microsoft 365. Okay, just be wary when you enable all of these. Some of the options and some of the configurations or conditions inside of the rule will be removed. Okay, so the likes of Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive, if these were independently selected, you would actually get more or less conditions than what you would do if it was just selected as a group like I have here. Here's a rule I'm talking about. So let's have a quick look inside of this rule then. So here's your conditions. Okay, now you can select when you have SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange selected as a location. You can select sensitive info types and sensitivity labels, so you can have them both running in the same DLP rule. But if my example here, I've just got my highly confidential internal and my confidential internal. So any documentation that's labeled with these two particular labels won't be allowed to be shared outside. Because in my conditions here, I've got detects when content is sent in an email message. And then this relates to people outside of my organization. So if somebody tries to share a modern link or an attachment of a link or a document that's been labeled within an email, the DLP rule will see that, and the DLP rule will then block any external people from consuming it. So any recipients that are outside of the organization won't get this email. All those that are inside will still receive the email. And then you've got down here your user notifications. You can select these, you can tweak these to whatever you want them to be really, and you can add any customized data, policy tip within here. So if you want to give your users the ability for training, so if they try to send an email out that has a document labeled, they'll get a policy tip. That policy tip will give them a brief introduction of why it's been blocked and the importance of not sharing this type of or this type of labeled data outside of the environment. We've got user overrides here as well. So if there's any use case or within your environment that allow people to send that type of data out, you have the ability to apply an override here. This is shown in the data classification activity explorer, that someone has tried to share this data. They've override it, so you've also got that audit log as well for those that have done the override or selected the override. Here your incident reports are, so you can choose from a number of low, medium and high. Depending on what the severity of the rule is, of course, you should always select the appropriate one that meets your requirements. Use email incident report to notify when a policy match occurs. So again, if a policy match occurs, who do you want that to go to? Who do you want it to be alerted to? You just add them in here, add and remove people, you get the box at the side here, and then you can just go through and select any people within your environment that need to see this particular alert. You also have incident reports to include information here as well. Just be cautious of this because this gives you actually the sensitive information content that's matched in the rules. So if you have somebody that just wants read-only to the DLP policies and you don't want them to be able to see the actual sensitive information inside of the item or the data or the email, whatever the case may be, then read these carefully before you apply them. This can cause a data breach in itself. And then you have additional options. So if you have a number of rules running inside of the policy itself, you can change the priorities around. If I had 2 or 3 in here, I would see 1, 2, 3 or 0, 1, 2 in here as well. So you have the ability to do that with inside of the rule, of course. And then we have a couple of options at the end. I would always recommend to try out first and then show policy tips. That gives you as an admin an introduction to what is inside of your environment and who's interacting or collaborating with what types of sensitive information or documents that have been labeled with a sensitivity label. This certainly helps you fine-tune your policies. Enabling the policy tips as well gives the user the ability to train themselves that I know now that this sensitive type of data can't be shared outside, or if I apply this label to something, I can't then share that outside. That's briefly DLP. Endpoint DLP settings here. So Endpoint DLP works on the Windows 10 layer. So if you have Windows 10 1809 and above installed, you're able to use Endpoint DLP. So there's a couple of prerequisites when it comes to Endpoint DLP. First and foremost, you need to have the machines onboarded into the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. If you're using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, they'll already be onboarded in. You just need to turn on the ability to monitor the devices from an endpoint perspective when it comes to DLP. You would just need to come into settings and then device onboarding to see what your options are, what your configuration status is at that time. If you don't see what I see here, you just have a blue button that says turn on. You just select turn on. That then basically turns all the configuration on service side. If you don't have Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, you can come to onboarding, and then you can basically pick one of these options here to actually onboard the devices into your environment. If you're using Intune, you can build out a package for Intune to auto enroll the devices. Same with Configuration Manager as well. If not, you have group policy and you have some VDI scripts as well. Within here, you'll see the device name, health status, configuration status, the last seen, the operating system, and the OS version. So here gives you the actual status of what they are. So you've got active, valid, and then obviously the date and time when it was last seen. Here's the two important bits then. So you'd see your operating system with Windows 10, and then you've got your OS version. If you have Windows 10 and anything below 1809, it will come up here and show unsupported. If you have a Windows 10 with an update like I have here, it's able to read that and able to publish that as well. I'll just take you back to Endpoint DLP. So with an Endpoint DLP then, the settings themselves, you have a number of options within here to prevent users interacting with sensitivity labeled documents or sensitive information types within a document of which your organization has configured. So you have specific file path exclusions in here. So if you know there's areas within a machine that don't interact or collaborate with sensitive information, then you can add them in here and you can basically remove them out. You also have the ability to allow unallowed apps in here also. So this doesn't prevent the user from using the app itself. This just prevents the user from using the app to gain access to sensitive information. So if I have a document that's labeled as highly confidential internal, and then I try to use Notepad++ to open that document, it won't allow me to do it. Or if I try to copy and paste information from that document into Notepad++, again, it won't allow me to do it. The same goes for Dropbox really. If I try and drag and drop that document that has been labeled into Dropbox as a third-party cloud storage solution, it won't allow me. Or if I go to Dropbox.com and I try to upload it to Dropbox.com, again, it won't allow me to do that, and that will come under your browser and domain restrictions below. Additionally, you've got the ability to take snapshots and snips with particular tools. The three of them, main three here. Again, if I try to take a snapshot of that or a snip of that particular document or the data within it, it won't allow me to do it. And again, another third-party cloud solution here with Box. If I try to upload anything into Box or copy and paste anything into Box locally within my machine, within the exe, it won't allow me to do it, but it will allow the user to continue to use the application. Unallowed Bluetooth apps, I've not really used this. I don't see this being used very often. Sometimes you'll get users that have a mobile phone that's been jailbroken or has some type of corruption or antivirus software on it that might allow them to use particular Bluetooth apps to to send data across. If you get that scenario, you can add that Bluetooth app in here, and you can block that app from sharing that to sensitive data as well. Then you've got browser and domain restrictions to sensitive data. So as I alluded to before, if I try to use any of these browsers here to interact or collaborate with that sensitive information type or document that has any sensitive information within it, or a document that's been labeled with a sensitivity label, it won't allow me to do it. Even if I use Firefox and try and upload to SharePoint and my own tenant SharePoint, it won't allow me to do it. You have to use Microsoft Edge to do that. Again, you want to prevent the user from using the browser. So if I have Firefox on my machine, I can happily browse the web, but I just can't interact with any sensitive information. On top of that, you have your service domains in here. So you don't particularly see a lot of companies using the block list. As it states, you would have to basically go through every type of block list that you can think of. So I only usually see in here just the Microsoft service domains, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, admin portals, and so on and so forth. And then we have additional settings for Endpoint DLP. So if you do have a business justification that you want to apply, and you want to apply some customization to it, then this is where you can come to do that, and you can add in your own text and so on and so forth from an organization perspective to make it more personal to your business. And then we've got always audit file activity. So regardless of any configurations that you may have on above or within the DLP policy, this will always run on the machine and monitor the machine of what's actually happening from a user perspective. This does give you a lot of information, so just be wary. I do see a lot of people turn this on, to be perfectly honest, because the more information you can get, the better, I guess. So, but it's not for everybody, so just take the opportunity to try it out before you commit to it. You can always turn it off if you need to. And then you have the alerts here for DLP. So within here you have the DLP policy matches, which will go through what's actually happened on your actual device. I've just gone through these yesterday just to get some triggers out for you. And this will go through, so you can select all sorts of configurations within the DLP policies themselves. So this is where you'd see any particular alerts. And then you have Activity Explorer. So with an Activity Explorer, it will show you a whole load of information, and that information can be around what happens on the endpoint, what happens in SharePoint, what happens in OneDrive. But for us, we're more interested in the Endpoint DLP triggers here. As you can see, it says file created, label applied, file renamed. These are all coming from the last setting I just showed you, which gives you the ability to monitor quite a lot on the machine. You also have the ability to look for any other endpoints like Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, as I've just alluded to. You can come up here and select any activity that you want. So if you know there's a DLP rule been matched or auto labeling simulation has been applied, you can come through here and select any particular type that you want, or any location that you want, depending on where you've got your DLP rule set up, or any user that you want, and more importantly, any sensitivity label that you want to basically take a closer look at. So who's done what with what type of label and so on and so forth. So I'll just select one for so you can actually see. So here you can see file created, file modified, label applied here. You can then go into the extension of the settings themselves and find out, where it was, who did it, what the source and location was, even the desktop name, and so on and so forth. So that's Endpoint DLP in a nutshell. On top of that, let's have a look at information governance. So within information governance, then we can select different retention policies or different label policies which we need to create for our environment. So we have a regulatory requirement to keep data for a certain amount of years. So we've got a couple of 7 years or 5 years, 3 years, 10 years. We can actually create those labels within here. I'll show you one very quickly. So this is again just around product retired. So this is just a demo one that I use. You create the label itself, you apply the actual retention to it. Whether it comes through as an auto delete, it shows you who created it, when it was last modified, it will create a date, and so on and so forth. Take a quick look at the actual policy itself, the label itself, sorry. So within here, you select the actual retention settings. So what type of timeline do you need? 5, 7, 10, or custom? With a custom one, you can choose, whatever, of course, whatever time-based period you need it to be. And then you have the events of what type of action do you want to apply at the end of that time-based period. So you've got delete items automatically, trigger a disposition review, do nothing, retain items forever, only delete items when they reach a certain age, do not retain or delete items. Okay, so you have a number of options in here. If you were to select the trigger a disposition review, that would then give you another option here to go through and select the disposition reviewers, should you need to do so. Then you have the actual label policies themselves. So this is actually the core configuration that gets pushed down to the users themselves. So within here you have the ability to apply regulatory records. And what that means is that if you apply this regulatory record to a data set or an item or a document, it makes it immutable. So the user can't change the item from its original value. Let's take a quick look at this one. Yeah, so you choose whichever label that you want to apply to it. Whatever retention period is on the back end of it, you can actually see from here. You choose your locations of where you want it to be applied. You select and name your policy, and then you go through and review your settings. Retention policies themselves. Come through and create them, again, depending on your regulatory requirement of what you need, how long you need to keep them for, and which workload you need to apply them to. So we have a couple of examples here of inactive mailboxes to be kept forever because of VIP users, or inactive mailboxes that need to be kept for 7 years for non-VIP users because you have a business requirement to keep it for that long. We also have a popular one here, just to delete all Teams chat data after 1 year. This will go through and do exactly that. I'll quickly show you through this one. So again, you just choose a location of where you want it to be applied to. You choose the actual settings in the background of how long you want to keep the data, so how long before you want the data to be deleted for. I've selected a custom one here and chosen a year. You go off when items were created. If you go when they were last modified, of course, they can be modified at any point because people go back into the chat and recreate that modification date within the chat itself. So if you wanted to do a Teams delete after 1 year, this is a good option to start with. Okay, and then we've got the ability to import third-party data into Teams itself, and you can use PST files to do that. So if you have Exchange on premise and you want to run an audit on that and plug it into 365 and keep that data for if you have a compliance archive or a regulation perhaps, or you just want to basically put everything into 365 that you have from an old archive on premise, you can do that within here, and you can also apply a retention period to it as well. Here you have your standard Exchange archive and mailbox. So you have your primary mailbox and your archive mailbox. You'd come in here to enable that archive mailbox. You just basically need to select the user and then disable or enable. Let's pick a disabled one, and then you can see here you get the ability to enable that archive. Let's go to records management. So as I said, records management is more of an extension of information governance. So within here, It's an E5 feature, so you would see a lot of businesses that have a regulatory requirement to extend their information governance into records management. Here's where you would come to do that. Initially, you would get the overview of what you have in your environment. Okay, so you have any pending dispositions, you can select here. This will take you to the pending dispositions. You can select the item, you can open a new window. This will take you through to the item itself. You as a reviewer or a disposition reviewer will then have the ability to look at that data or any items that are within here, select them, and then purge them for deletion. You also have the ability to use the file plan. So if you have a mature retention schedule or a retention matrix within your environment, you can actually use that and basically upload that into 365. So it saves you a lot of time having to replicate those changes into 365. If you upload it into 365 here, just basically update it, import it rather, and then it will give you all of the information of which you have in your environment from your on-premise environment as well. So that saves you a great deal of time. You also have label policies here. So again, mapping back to your regulatory items here, you can add in whatever label policies that you want or whatever you need. As you can see from this one, because this is classed as an immutable item, preservation lock down here is enabled. Preservation lock basically allows you as an administrator to lock that retention label policy down. That then means that nobody can change that from its original value. So if an admin was to go in and try to change the actual label policy itself, they're unable to do so. Once this is on, it's on forever. Even Microsoft at the back end cannot turn this on. So make sure you have a regulatory requirement to turn this on before you do so. Again, you have the ability to auto apply as well, which comes up from this configuration setting here. This again is an E5 solution, so I'll show you quickly what that actually relates to. Because you can choose certain data types or certain sensitive information types to apply that to. So on this one, it basically applies to label content that contains sensitive info. You can also do that from specific words or phrases or properties, or you can use a trainable classifier to do that as well. So within here, as you can see, we have PII identifiers and medical terms. So if any of these are matched inside of a document, it will auto apply a retention label to that document. That then means that that data is automatically classified and kept for whatever time-based period you have applied within the actual policy itself. All locations here are Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Groups. Which label you want to apply. So we've got this retention label here, and we know that with this data needs to be kept for 7 years. And then of course you just go through and review your settings and finish off. We also have the ability to apply events-based retention. Okay, so what this means is if an employee was to send an email with in the subject employee termination or employee resignation, that then would kick off a retention policy in the background. As you can see here, my example is termination. So I, as a user, I send an email and I have this in my subject. This picks it up, and then it will basically apply that retention period to that email or all of my locations where my data is, and then that's automatically kept for a time-based period of whatever you need to do from a business perspective. So back to disposition then, as I alluded to before, if you need a disposition review on data before it's committed for deletion, this is where you would come to do that disposition review itself. And again, as I alluded to at the start, Microsoft now has the ability to have multi-stage disposition reviews. I think you can have up to 5. So you have a good number of people that will review that data before it's deleted. On to information protection then. So within here, we have the labels, label policies, and auto labeling. So if you have a classifications taxonomy within your business, this is where you would come to build those out. Okay, and as you can see here, we have unified groups enabled and sites enabled. What that means is that you can actually apply that sensitivity label to a SharePoint site or a Microsoft 365 group or Microsoft Teams channel. That then gives you the ability to apply a naming convention to those channels, those groups, or whatever the case may be. So your user can identify what type of data that is inside of that particular container itself. You have your label policies here. Your label policies are obviously those that are pushed down to the permissions to the users themselves. So I have a single global policy here, which is pushed to all my users in my demo tenant. That means they're all able to apply those labels. We also have auto labeling here. So auto labeling again will pick out any particular sensitive information type that you've mapped into it. Once it detects that sensitive information type, it'll actually apply that sensitivity label to that document. That then alleviates any mistakes from a user end perspective. But what I will say, if you do want to use auto labeling, as you can see here, mine is set up to run in simulation mode. It will not allow you to turn on auto labeling if you haven't run simulation mode, and you must be sure that the data that it's actually pulling through and reporting to be classified is in fact true. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So that is a brief introduction to the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. So if there's any questions, you can put them into the chat. Raz will send them on to me. But again, thanks to Raz and the organization for letting me do this today. And thanks to everybody for listening to me. Thank you.